Oh, yes, friends. Hello. It's time to talk about one of the most outrageous, ridiculous, and one of the all-time most hated bands to come out of the Warped Tour metalcore scene. That's right, Atlanta, Georgia's own Attila.
Everybody, middle fingers up! Alright, mother, listen up. This is for the any given no. If you want to join the party, put your middle fingers up and with their music. If you better everybody
Now, from a non-pretentious point of view, their music really is nothing more than a beer-cracking good time. But because they incorporated a lot of elements into their music and persona which were deemed downright outlandish and polarizing when it came to the context of the Warped Tour scene at the time, such as a brazen rap and hip-hop influence incorporated into their southern fried metalcore riffs, as well as straight-up ignorant party lyrics such as "The ladies love me 'cause I always f*** 'em good, flip 'em over, do the tongue trick, and treat 'em with the big." And last but not least, their lead singer Chris Fronzak, or Fronz, his self-described cocky and douchey frontman persona, who moonlights as a t-shirt salesman who is responsible for those shirts that say in giant letters, "Suck my fuck," which became maybe a little bit more successful than they should have amongst teenage Warped Tour attendees like 8 or 9 years ago. Despite being hated on for most of their career, the trashy Atlanta, Georgia Good Time Boys and Attila are still a band to this day with 9 freaking full-length albums under their belt, if you can believe it. The first one dating back to 2007, actually. So today, I am going to dive into the history and career trajectory of Attila before giving you some of my personal thoughts on the band as we ponder the questions. Are Attila the worst band in Warped Tour history, or are they simply just a guilty pleasure if you're looking to jam out to some ignorant, country-fried, hip-hop infused breakdowns? Is Fronz really a horrible douchebag, or is he simply just a semi-entertaining frontman who's a good businessman and shouldn't be taken that seriously? Come, let's take this ride together, friends. I am the Cozy Representative, and today I bring you the Attila story, the most hated Warped Tour metalcore band. Let's go. But first, I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to everyone who supports me over on Patreon. There's a link in the description if you want to check that out. It's a great way to support the channel if you're a fan of what I do. In the $5 tier, there's access to weekly videos, or as weekly as I possibly can, videos for a series called Cozy's Basement. You can check out the info for that in the link. And in the $10 monthly tier, you get all the other bonus content, plus if you want me to do a video review of your band, I do one at the end of every month. You can get in touch with me on there to make that happen, or if you just want to support the channel further, a little goes a long way. And big thank you again to anyone and everyone who supports me on there. Y'all are the best. Thank you. And with that, onwards to the freaking Attila story. Let's go. So, freaking Attila were formed in the year 2005, believe it or not. Like I said, in Atlanta, Georgia, when singer Chris Fronzak was only 14 years old in his freshman year of high school. Chris Fronzak, also known by his nickname Fronz, got to know some kids who were a couple years older than him at his high school who played in a local metal band called Southern Creation. Now, Southern Creation were looking for a vocalist, and the young Fronz, who showed an interest in music but wasn't super competent at any of the instruments he tried to pick up, decided on a whim that he would try out for Southern Creation as vocalist. At his first practice with the band, Fronz did a lot better on vocals than he expected, and he realized he had a little bit of natural talent when it came to screamed vocals, and the rest of the band members in Southern Creation liked what they heard, and they agreed to officially have the young Fronz as their new vocalist. Not long after that, the band changed their name to Attila after reading about Attila the Hun in a history book. Fronz has said that they wanted a name that was one word and a name that had no references to bleeding or dying or death, because back in the 2000s, at the time, every heavy band was called like As I Lay Dying or Every Time I Die or As Blood Runs Black or some variation of that, so they settled on Attila. The band first released a 3-song demo in 2006, and they began playing lots of local shows around the Atlanta area, as well as doing a little bit of touring, which they self-booked on MySpace, which was all the rage at the time. And on March 30th of 2007, the band released their debut full-length record, which was called Fallacy, which was self-released by the band. So Fallacy is a bit different from Attila's later material musically. They weren't yet a party band, and there was no rap influence in there yet. The band was way more just straight up metal at this point. I guess I would classify this album as straight up dirty southern fried metalcore with some deathcore heaviness in there too. There's like pig squeals on this album, and even some clean singing vocals from Chris Fronzak, which wouldn't appear as much on later releases. Pretty cool to hear that. And overall, Fallacy is actually really good for what it is, for such a young band. And if you are into heavy music, but not as into Attila's later rap-influenced party metal, Fallacy might just be right up your alley. It's actually a pretty solid release. So, not long after Fallacy was released, however, 3 of the original members, guitarists Matt Booth and Chris Wilson, as well as their bassist Sam Holcomb, all left the band, leaving Fronz and their drummer Sean Heenan as the only remaining members. Now, believe it or not, in a YouTube comment, of all things, I actually found on the YouTube upload of the full Fallacy album, believe it or not, original bassist Sam Holcomb left a comment explaining the general reasons why all 3 of these original members left. He said, quote, "Chris left before I did. It was never the same after that. Fronz and I had different opinions on the musical direction. Also, too much partying, not enough practice. Matt Booth quit not too long after for the same reasons. Wanted to play more metal, while Fronz morphed the style into Soundtrack to a Party," which leads us into Attila's second full-length record, yes, 2008's Soundtrack to a Party.
Next song's a brand new one, but I'm gonna need your guys' help on this one. This song's called Soda in the Water Club. Help me start this song.
So, following the exit of the 3 original members, Fronz replaced them with 3 new guys, a bassist named Paul Ollinger, I think I'm pronouncing that right, and guitarists Chris Link and Nate Salome. They entered the fold, and apparently these new dudes were along for the ride in terms of Franz's vision of turning Attila into a straight-up party metal band, because Soundtrack to a Party was exactly that. Released on December 9th of 2008 through a small label called Static Factory Records, Soundtrack to a Party is definitely the birth of the Attila we know today, albeit a primitive and rough around the edges version of it. While the album definitely retains the southern fried metalcore and darker deathcore elements of Fallacy, this album is simply a lot more buck wild, ignorant, and party-centric, to put it bluntly. In certain places, there's even more of a kind of thrash metal influence, and the band's love for Pantera is a lot more noticeable in the overall, dirty southern elements of this album. While Attila were still not nearly as rap rock as they would later become, the crunk hip-hop influenced electronic metalcore opener Let's Start the Party is certainly an indicator of the direction in which Fronz was taking things.
I'm gonna ask you guys one more time, Tampa, Florida, how the fuck we feeling tonight? Fuck yeah, we're Attila from Atlanta, Georgia. It's good to be back here tonight. Thank you so fucking much for sticking around with us. Let's start the fucking party. Get this shit pumping. Stand inside, let's do this shit.
The biggest change for Attila on this album, however, had to be the introduction of Franz's new lyrical content, which, in a nutshell, was all about partying, all about drinking heavily, smoking weed, and not giving a fuck.
Get on your bed!
An interesting thing about that is, in this era of heavy music, the 2000s, where Christian metalcore was all the rage, freaking Under Oath, Devil Wears Prada, Bless the Fall, the list goes on and on and on. So many Christian metalcore bands, that was the thing. Attila, with their, Satan-worshipping, weed-smoking, binge-drinking party metal, they were certainly bringing something different and kind of shocking to the table at the time. The band also scored their first minor hit song on this record, which was Soda in the Water Cup, which became pretty well known at the time within the underground MySpace metalcore scene, as it were. There is a part in this song where Fronz does this, really fast rap scream sort of thing, which kind of became his trademark vocal thing that he would do a lot more later on their albums. The band also began touring a lot more in support of Soundtrack to a Party throughout 2009, alongside smaller MySpace-era heavy bands such as Kill Whitney Dead, Dr. Acula, and Drop Dead Gorgeous. Their fan base began growing as well, with the help of the internet and a presence on MySpace. Because of their growing fan base, their dedication to touring, as well as their infectious party animal music, which brought something different and attention-grabbing to the table, by the time 2010 had rolled around, Attila officially signed with a slightly bigger and more prominent label in the scene called Artery Recordings, who at the time had also signed prominent heavy bands such as Chelsea Grin, Barry Tomorrow, and A Bullet for a Pretty Boy, to name a few. And at that moment, with that signing, it was officially off to the races for the young Attila, and touring and making music now became their full-time job, and the boys were destined to attempt to take the scene by storm, for better or for worse. Now, with backing from a more prominent scene label, on May 11th of 2010, Attila released their next album, technically their third record, but their first one with real proper label backing, distribution, and palpable fan hype, you know. This album was called Rage. So, on a musical level, Rage, as well as the album that came after it, 2011's Outlawed, these two albums is definitely my personal favorite era of Attila. If I were to go and listen to any Attila albums on my own time for fun, these two records are definitely my go-to. Rage is basically a cleaned up, heavier, harder hitting, more fleshed out, and way more well done version of Soundtrack to a Party, and 2011's Outlawed is an even dirtier, crazier, and logical musical next step after Rage. Rage is definitely revered by a lot of their older fans who often regard it as Attila's best album. It's definitely a fan favorite, and it was also a lot of people's first taste of Attila. Again, it took Attila's sound, Attila's blend of country fried southern metalcore with a darkened deathcore swagger to the next level. The music sounded tightened up and better than ever on this one. Chris Link and Nate Salame's guitar playing was really on point on both Rage and Outlawed. Say what you want about Fronz or, you know, Attila's music and their presence and whatever, but they have always had really skilled guitar players playing some genuinely really cool guitar parts, if you ask me. While Attila wasn't quite full-on rap rock yet, Fronz did have that rap scream thing going on sometimes, and his outlandish, in-your-face, hip-hop-like lyrics focused on drinking beer, partying, smoking weed, and scoring chicks. Two of my personal favorite songs on Rage are the opener, Make It Sick, as well as the sort of almost Every Time I Die-esque song Temper, but the real hit on this album, the real fan favorite on Rage, was the title track, Rage, which kind of became the soda in the water cup of this album and became like a minor scene hit. The song Rage also features one of the goofiest and most hype partycore breakdowns ever written.
You live, you don't give up!
Their next album, 2011's Outlawed, I kind of look at Rage and Outlawed as almost a part one and part two to each other, if that makes sense. They both feel like kind of the same era of Attila in a way. Outlawed was released again through Artery Recordings, and this also marks the band's first time recording with producer Joey Sturgis, who was, as you guys probably know, the star producer of the metalcore scene at the time. He had previously worked with Attack Attack, Asking Alexandria, of Mice and Men. Literally every big metalcore band at the time was working with Joey Sturgis, and now Attila were as well. Outlawed saw Attila expanding their sound a little bit. For example, the song Another Round is a bit more of a straight-up, hard-hitting, like, southern rock track. The big hit on this album, however, another minor scene hit in Attila's canon, was the song Payback, which included probably one of the craziest and most offensive lyrics of any metalcore band at the time. Yeah, that one definitely didn't age super well. It also featured a crazy fast rap scream part from Fronz, which I gotta admit sounds absolutely wild. So, this era of Attila, I would say they were a solid mid-tier scene metalcore band as far as their popularity went. They didn't instantly blow up to be top dogs in the scene. They were no Asking Alexandria or Of Mice and Men, but they had grown a solid fan base and were making a living doing real touring, and were certainly getting their name out there on some pretty decent tours alongside fellow Warped Tour scene up-and-comers like Sleeping with Sirens, Memphis Mayfire, Woe Is Me, as well as touring with more established bands like Amir and As Blood Runs Black, to name a couple. The band were really hitting the road hard during these 2 album cycles, and they were really succeeding in getting their name out there and trying to get to that next level of being a just a bigger, more well-known scene band, as it were. So, Attila's real breakout moment in the scene, the thing that really captured lots of people's attention and caused Attila to ascend to being one of the bigger Warped Tour bands at the time, and definitely ruffled a lot of people's feathers and got a lot of haters running their mouths, was their next record, 2013's About That Life.
Listen up, California! You can do anything you want in life! There's no real fucking thing! What's your name?
About That Life, which was once again released through Artery Recordings and produced by scene metalcore superstar producer Joey Sturgis, was, up to that point, Attila's crowning achievement, and to this day might be still their most crowning achievement. Up until that point, it was easily their most ignorant, their most buck-wild, lyrically their most stupid and ridiculous, and musically their most attention-grabbing and hard-hitting record. It was a defining moment in their career and really put them on the map, selling 14,000 copies in its first week and hitting number 22 on the Billboard 200, their highest-selling and highest-charting record yet. This is the album where Attila really became somewhat of a polarizing rap rock band, or rap metalcore band, I should say. They were still very heavy and full of blistering breakdowns, but the ignorant southern party rap style had really incorporated itself into their sound on this record, which that in itself made a ton of scene elitists and metal purists very mad. And Fronz's lyrics on this thing, my god, he really went over the top and downright buck wild and crazy on this album with his lyrical content. Like, it's straight up just funny. It's like a comedy record.
Just replace it with a dick. You're sitting here begging, and I'm just like, I don't give a fuck. The thing is funny, cause I only fucking realize that the fuck I do the dumb, drinking treat up with the bitch. Eat my shit!
Attila actually scored themselves a lot of popular scene hits on this album, believe it or not. Middle Fingers Up, for example, was a big song. The title track, About That Life, was a really big song with a music video that definitely gained a lot of attention because it showed Attila, you know, this metal band, in a pretty unironic portrayal of a rap video with Fronz smoking a giant bong and, like, girls with really big butts shaking their really big butts and the band just partying and going wild. This music video was arguably the thing that really turned people's heads and got people talking the most, and had a lot to do with putting Attila on the map in general. The Breakdown Fest, Party with the Devil, was another big song on this record, but one of my favorite moments on About That Life, one of the funniest songs to me, is the song Call Out, where Fronz really went out on a limb and made a straight-up rap metal diss song, brazenly firing shots at his peers, other Warped Tour band guys who he, I guess, had a problem with, calling them out by name. He started off the song calling out Johnny Craig for the whole MacBook scandal with the line, "Hey kids, give me all your fucking money, got 100 MacBooks and I swear I'm not a druggie." He called out Ronnie Radke in regards to an incident where he injured some fans by throwing mic stands into the crowd, saying, "Even Ronnie Radke talks shit on my Instagram. Give me your address so I can hit you with a mic stand." He calls out Christopher Drew from Never Shout Never for his incident with a popular YouTube scene interviewer at the time, Brian Stars. And keep in mind, this was a few years before Brian Stars himself got exposed for not being a very good guy. The Chris Drew lyric is a bit homophobic. He's, in like a dumb way. He says, "Send me a letter about the guys that you blew and that you butt-fucked. His name is Christopher Drew. How can you talk down on your biggest fan? Your career is on its way to the garbage can." Just straight dumb, ignorant shit. Despite the homophobia in that line, later in the very same song, Fronz says, "If you hate gay people, you should get your ass beat. You're a closed-minded bitch, kiss my feet." Lyrical genius here. So he's, using a homophobic slur to fight homophobia. It would be better and more justified if Fronz himself was LGBT. I'm pretty sure he's straight, so like I said, he's just being straight ignorant on these lines. Again, it was like 2013, not that that makes a difference, but, I hope Fronz has grown and become more educated about the error of his ways in using that one particular word, but that's a whole other conversation. He also ends the song with a pretty hilarious line calling out the super homophobic Westboro Baptist Church. He says, "Hey Westboro Baptist, fuck you too, come protest this dick." So obviously that song gained a lot of attention in the scene, and like I said, the About That Life crazy music video gained a lot of traction. The other scene hits on this album gained a lot of traction, and like I said, About That Life ended up really putting Attila on the map and propelling them to Warped Tour scene celebrity status. They were officially a big band. And as Brokenside once said, "Haters make me famous," and that couldn't be more true when it came to Attila after they dropped About That Life back in 2013. Attila definitely had their fans, but as you could imagine, a lot of people fucking hated this album and hated this band back when this thing dropped. It was like a little too out there and a little too crazy buck for a lot of metal elitists and young Warped Tour kids alike. I feel like back in 2013 and 2014, for every one genuine Attila fan, there were like 3 extra people who absolutely hated this stuff and openly talked a lot of shit. This album got a lot of pretty funny bad reviews at the time from music publications too, which kind of echoed the general sentiment and opinions of what a lot of the people in the scene were saying about them at the time. For example, Metal Sucks said, "Totally obsessed with superficial bullshit, Chris Franzak seemingly can't help but leave a trail of douche slime everywhere he goes." All Music stated that About That Life from Southern Fried Party Metalcore outfit Attila sounds a little like Hinder, GBH, and Disturbed gave birth to a stillborn child and then had Fred Durst reanimate it. Decibel wrote that Attila are one of those party douchebag bands who add dance beats, homophobia, misogyny, and rapping skills whiter than newly fallen snow to down-tuned junk metal, and guys to perform inane, generic, sterile chugcore just so the singer can get his rocks off on weird fantasies where he's a badass bitch fucker. That's pretty funny. Despite all the bad reviews, occasionally there would be someone who had something positive to say about Attila. For example, a writer for Artist Direct wrote that About That Life is a fucking blast. It's a beer-cracking, skull-snapping, and ass-shaking good time from Atlanta's wildest crew. And funny enough, the Westboro Baptist Church actually did take Fronz up on his offer and did end up apparently protesting an Attila show in Kansas that year, which is pretty hysterical. So to me, at this point, looking back, About That Life, I think, really was the crowning achievement and true landmark essential album for Attila. That album and the aftermath of it in the few years following it may have just been Attila's true peak as a band in this particular Warped Tour scene. The two albums they did directly following About That Life, 2014's Guilty Pleasure as well as 2016's Chaos, were both kind of just them building off of the standard that they set for themselves on About That Life. Both of those albums have a mix of, the edgy, offensive, rap rock influenced metalcore tracks, which Attila are known for, and also sometimes showed the band showing glimpses of pushing the boundaries outside of their typical musical wheelhouse. For example, the track Break My Addiction on Guilty Pleasure is a more serious kind of song about the darker sides of partying and being trapped in the throes of addiction, while the song Bulletproof off of Chaos shows the band sort of attempting a nu metal inspired straightforward radio rock song, which is kind of interesting.
Everybody sing it with me. Say what you want, but nothing can stop.
And like I was saying earlier, Attila have defied all odds stacked against them and are still pushing on as a band to this day, despite, maybe a slight decline, maybe a pretty big decline in popularity since the About That Life days. I mean, you can only shock and offend the world so many times, am I right? Their 2019 album, Villain, was probably the heaviest album they had released in a while, kind of returning to the crazier, heavier metalcore style of older albums like Rage and Outlawed, but it doesn't really capture the same, I don't know if you would call it magic, but the same goodness of those albums, if you will. But, I guess it's solid. And they followed that up with another album just last year in 2021 called Closure, which musically and lyrically is kind of just more of the same from Attila. But they are still a band, still pushing and doing their thing after all these years, and their diehard fans still back them. Fronz is also, like I was saying earlier, well known for being somewhat of a businessman outside of Attila, most known for his clothing line called Stay Sick, which he started in about 2011 or so and really started to blow up within the Warped Tour world around 2013, around the same time as their About That Life album. Most specifically, their t-shirt, their signature t-shirt, which reads "Suck My Fuck" in giant letters, becoming really popular. While it is impressive, Franz's business savvy and his ability to get a successful clothing line off the ground, that's a hard thing to do. On the flip side, I remember in 2013 or 14 or so, I was still going to Warped Tour at the time, and I fucking hated seeing so many of these Suck My Fuck shirts. I just thought they were so ugly and stupid and just kind of tasteless. And I still kind of think that. But much like the band Attila themselves, it's like this double-edged sword where, it's stupid and dumb, but it's also it's kind of funny, and it's just an interesting subculture phenomenon, you know what I mean? It's not really worth getting all that mad at. Fronz has also gained attention in recent years for having his own OnlyFans account and dabbling in the porn world, which, makes perfect sense for a guy like him. Him having an OnlyFans, it totally doesn't even matter either. Some people, including Buddy Nielsen, called him out for it or whatever and thought it was kind of weird, but, hey, if you're an adult and you want to make porn, it's your fucking body. Go for it, respect sex workers, homie, let people do their thing, even if it's Fronz. We know that Fronz is outlandish and always goes where the money goes, so it makes sense that he would start an OnlyFans, or an Only Fronz, as he calls it. And that's a pretty good segue into the final chapter of this video. I'll try to make it quick, but my personal thoughts on Attila as a band and my thoughts on Fronz as a person and his presence in the scene. So, my personal thoughts on Attila and Chris Fronzak. I'll try to keep this short and sweet. Musically, I think I mentioned this earlier, but musically, I think Attila actually are great musicians. For what it's worth, say what you want about them, but their guitar parts have always been really creative and like require a lot of skill to play these parts, you know what I mean? I think they would be looked at as a really like serious band if they had the same guitar parts, but like not Franz's lyrics, When it comes to metalcore, they're actually musically a really good band. And also, like I said, if I were to listen to any Attila stuff personally, it would definitely be either the Rage album or the Outlawed album, or even Soundtrack to a Party, too. I think those albums in that era of the band, they were actually doing something really cool and hit a real sweet spot. I listened to About That Life a lot back when I was in high school when it came out because it just sounded super badass and funny and crazy to like 16-year-old me. But at this point, I really wouldn't ever put on any Attila album after Outlawed for personal enjoyment, I think Fronz honestly is just way too gimmicky with his whole persona. And by the time that for example, the Guilty Pleasure album came around and beyond that, I listen to these songs and it feels more like Fronz is just a businessman who's trying to sell me that he's this character who's really wild and crazy and oh my god, he's not afraid to say anything, versus the older Rage and Outlawed stuff where it actually did kind of sound more genuine, if that makes sense. There are many aspects of Fronz where it's like, oh yeah, well, he's a good businessman and he's, playing this role, whether or not it's really who he is, it's still admirable. He's got the successful businessman thing with the way that he's able to, play this character and sell this product that is the wild, crazy, offensive party band Attila. But my thing is, I'm not a businessman. I'm not in school to be a businessman. I don't care really about someone's business accomplishments on a personal level. I'm a music fan first and foremost. And musically, everything after Outlawed, or really everything after About That Life, I guess, because About That Life can still be kind of fun to listen to, but everything after that just feels too corny and gimmicky for me, you know what I mean? Sometimes it feels like I'm like too old for it or something, I don't know. It's cool that he's able to sell a lot of t-shirts and be this successful musical businessman or whatever, but again, as a music fan first and foremost, it's way cooler and more impressive and meaningful to me to just be a great musician and do something amazing with your art. When a band kind of feels more like a capitalist vehicle to just sell your crazy product, it feels a bit more hollow to me, and that's why I just can't really vibe with a lot of Attila stuff on a grander scale. And I don't necessarily think Fronz is that bad of a guy. When I watch interviews with him or whatever, he seems nice, he seems funny, seems like maybe a cool guy to hang out or drink a beer with or whatever, maybe, I don't know. And again, those earlier Attila albums are still pretty cool to me, but Attila at this point aren't a band who I fully back as a scene music fan or whatever. Like I said, I did listen to them a lot in high school specifically, because they were just funny and crazy. But if I was like at a party or something and someone asked me like, oh, what kind of bands are you into? Or like, oh, like what kind of Warped Tour bands did you listen to in high school? I would never ever be like, oh yeah, Attila. I'm like always embarrassed to listen to them, honestly, even when I'm alone, because they're just so like, they just have such a trashy and douchey vibe on the surface level of it. They're just one of those bands where they're more funny than anything. They're like Weird Al Yankovic. They're like the Weird Al Yankovic of 2013 Warped Tour. But like I said, at the end of the day, like the reason why I'm making this video and just, is because they're an interesting band, though. They are interesting. You got to give them that. They're an interesting case. They're such a one-off kind of band, so that's why it's kind of fun and interesting to look into them sometimes. But anyways, that about covers it for today. In a nutshell, that's the basic history of Attila, as well as my personal thoughts. What do you think about Attila? Are you a proud fan? Do you hate them? Or are you like me, where you listen to them a lot in high school and there's like some elements of Attila that you think are interesting and funny, and there's other elements that you don't really vibe with, and you still listen to them sometimes, but you put your Spotify account on private mode when you do? Let me know! As always, it's been your man Cozy. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's video. Like and subscribe if you liked this or whatever, or don't. Do your thing. Thank you guys. Love ya. Stay tuned for more videos from me. Peace out. Have a good night.